There are two things I especially want to tell you about Keisha Gaskins. She was a senior counsel with the Brennan Center, where her portfolio included redistricting reform, voting rights, elections, and a focus on voter suppression issues. She knows our issues. She also was executive director for the League of Women Voters of Minnesota, so she knows us. Keisha Gaskins.
Oh, good afternoon. Oh my goodness, let's try this one more time. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. All right, that's what I'm talking about. I'm home. I have to say, when y'all asked me to come speak, I was surprised. This is such an important year, and you all are so important to this election year. So I am humbled by the fact you have allowed me to share some thoughts and some time with you all as we're thinking about what we're doing and how we're moving forward, because the one thing I will back up very quickly, nobody knows what nonpartisan means. And so one of the big challenges is not using the word nonpartisan anymore. Say we don't endorse candidates, we don't do that, but don't think you're going to tell people nonpartisan. For some reason, people think nonpartisan means constitutionally incapable of having an opinion about anything. And to my recollection, that has nothing to do with this group. And so I wanted to say thank you. And thank you for allowing me to share. The other thing I wanted to share is I'm getting married in September, and to my lovely fiance Carla, and she and I were finishing up the save the dates, and we sent out the save the dates, and it had the date on it, and it had the this is where you need to go, and it had another tab for register to vote, and so. And we clearly indicated that if you actually send us a screenshot of your confirmed voter registration, you don't have to give us a gift. So y'all have stuck with me and will stay with me for the rest of my life. So I work now for the Rockefeller Brothers Fund. We are a 75-year grant-making organization, and I am honored to work in the Democratic Practice Program for the United States. What that means is I direct all the funding nationally around democracy and democratic transformation. I specifically don't say reform. One of the challenges about reform is it sort of means changing the rules or moving around the deck chairs. And what we really want to be looking at now in the 21st century is how do we transform our democracy into something that's meaningful for everyone who needs to engage in it. And we find that work incredibly important. And you all, of course, are a big part of that work. And as we think about that work, one of the big challenges that we see is membership organizations are changing dramatically, and what it means, and what are we talking about in the 21st century to be like a membership organization. And so y'all have asked me to come and talk to you a bit about data and reporting and the relationship between data. Because the one thing that's very different about this position, rather than being an advocate or being on the ground with you all, is that you dealt with what was in front of you, and you had some crises day after day. We were in the voter ID fight in Minnesota. You know, we're constantly like churning this work. And in this job, I'm forced to stand back, right? If I'm actually, once I read it in the paper, it's too late. Right? It used to be I could pick up the paper, see something, and said, oh my God, we have to do something. I'm suing somebody, like tomorrow. Like I could, you know. And now I have to stand back and say, I read something in the paper that's horrible, and I have to say, gosh, I hope I funded somebody who can do something about this. Right? It's a very different lens on the world. And so as we continue to move this work forward, one of the big challenges, not just with the League of Women Voters, NAACP, Common Cause, a lot of organizations that have membership organizations that have been around for a very long time are facing a lot of challenges. And one of the biggest challenges out there is telling your story. And the story is incredibly important, and I think that there's a lot of conflation between the ideas of like, we have to get data, we have to get clicks, we have to get views and clicks and sites and twits and tweets, and you know, and how do you reconcile that with the actual work of the organization and the doing of the day-to-day? Because we all know there is no substitute for that moment when you look in someone's eyes and they say, I get it. I understand. I understand why you care about this. I don't even agree with you about the issues, but I understand why we both care about this issue and we're going to move forward together. And that isn't necessarily something that magically happens in a tweet, right? So what does it mean to be more present online and collect this data when you know the work is the day-to-day lift and the grind? And one of the challenges with telling that story is an expression, too, that I heard at a League conference, convention, when I worked here a while back, and I don't remember who said it. Maybe, Elizabeth, you remember. No one ever marched on Washington because of a pie chart. That data is important, but it definitely has its limitations. And what is that relationship? But one of the challenges, it does allow us to tell an important story, right? It does tell us who's engaged, how many people are engaged, where they're engaged, and it also allows organizations individually, whether it's local leagues, state leagues, and how national can use all that energy and force to be able to bubble up and be able to talk to me and my colleagues about how to support that work. Right? Because the inability to tell that story in a comprehensive, cohesive way fundamentally means that both individual and institutional donors will not support. And so what does that mean? How do we talk about this, right? How do we talk about the work that we know is so good? I should have put my notes on a bigger screen, but... and so the big thing, one of the big things is, one, how do you use the data to tell your story? And two, are you collecting data that's meaningful, right? Are you collecting data in a way that actually tells you something? And so if you're thinking about, one of the things that people always want to tell me is like, how many members they have. And I was like, well, okay, how many members do you have? And they'll say 5 million. Okay. How do you count your members? Well, they're anyone who's connected with our issues and taken an action based on what we've communicated to them. All right, it's not a bad definition. It doesn't show a high level of investment, but fine. And then I asked the question, of those 5 million members, if we asked them, how many of them would consider themselves members of your organization? I can tell you the number drops precipitously at that point. That there's a big difference between numbers that are sort of meaningless, that are ephemeral, that are short-term, right? And numbers that actually tell you something about what you're actually doing, right? How many times does someone visit your website? Sometimes it's helpful. Sometimes it's me having like 800 like moments and being like, oh God, I forgot, I gotta go back, it's like, so now you've got 10 websites, 10 visits, but they're me, And so what we need to know is like, how many are unique? How many are triggered by activities on the ground? How much is collected? How much is connected? And this is true even for non-online information, right? I'm going to say this. When I was working with the League, I'm ashamed to think of how many sign-up lists ended up in a drawer somewhere, and that's who do we know who came? Yep. They're right here. What'd you do with it? Put on the stack with the other ones. Do you know how many times the same name has appeared on all these different stacks? That's your efficacy. That's your story. How many people have not just come once, but twice, 3, 4 times, who have never joined, but who have engaged in their community because of the contact and information that the League of Women Voters provide? If you can't tell that story, nobody can, and no one's going to do it for you. And that's just an incredibly important piece, and it doesn't have to be hugely complicated. That's the other thing. We have a tendency, too, to kind of think, well, I got this Google Analytics report, and it told me these things, and I don't really know what it says, and this, that, and the other, and I've got this intern showing up in like 2 weeks, and they're going to figure it out because they're in college and they do the twit. But they don't know you. Right? They don't know you, they don't know your community, they don't know the issues that are at the heart and soul of where you are. So using that data to tell your story becomes really challenging and difficult. A lot of it is as simple as consolidating it in one place in a way that you can say, what do I now know about the people who came to the last 5 events in our group? What do we know about them? And if you happen to live in a place with geo-local leagues, you might even want to share those lists. Because I lived in one district for one league and worked in another local league, right? And I went to both events. And I got to tell you, Google Drive, Google Docs, it's a magical thing. It's not complicated, but it's a place you can consolidate information. People can share it. You can leave it. But for ones who want to use it, tell your story. The league, the thing I thought was really interesting about hearing Celinda Lake's data about the league and how it's trusted is that data hasn't changed. That polling is not, it's new polling, but it's not new information. We did that same polling across the Midwest back in 2006, and people said, what do we like about the league? We know we can trust the league. We know league is going to speak truth. The league highly correlates to the most active members of your community. How does that translate to today? What is the big thing that everyone's talking about now, right? It is non-aggregate, non-hierarchical organizing and leadership. Having people in community taking ownership over a common message and shooting it out through neighborhoods and communities where they have context and resources. Well, who does that sound like? Who has it sounded like already for the last 100 years, right? Give yourselves a round. You are already here. The question is, are you communicating that? Are you connecting it to the issues of how people live? Are you allowing the how to interrupt your ability to explain who you are? And then those are the questions of the day. And so for someone like me who loves the league, I believe in it. I believe in the work of the league. No one else does it the way you all do it. No one has the depth into community the way you have it. And it's not evolving in new ways right now. And one of the big questions we have is, how do we take this digital space and connect it to the on-the-ground game? And you all are uniquely positioned to define that relationship in meaningful ways because you already have the ground game relationships. We just have to figure out how do we look at the data, look at the metrics, define what we want in a way that's useful, because when you define it in a way that's not useful, you also drive activity in a very strange way. Right? If we say, we're going to count the number of members, and we're not counting the quality of members or the number of touches, you could very literally accrue a lot of members and have really bad relationships at the same time and actually harm the organization in the long run. So maybe you don't want to measure how many members, but you want to remember how many members have attended 3 or more meetings within a metropolitan or geographic or rural community. Because then you're counting the numbers that are meaningful, that tell your story, and when you have those anecdotal stories of someone who said, I came to this meeting and it made a difference, when you have those anecdotal conversations, that's what gives meaning and frame to the data, right? So I'll give an example. Back in 2008, when I was working with the Brennan Center, I was still at the league in 2008. Back in 2011, when I was working at the Brennan Center, the Heritage Foundation and my archenemy, Hans von Spakovsky, who is an awesome, awesome person to have as an archenemy, frankly. It sounds very, Bullwinkle and Rocky and all that. And we were doing a news show, and he pointed out, very importantly and very correctly, that 2008 saw a strong increase of African American voters in the state of Georgia over 2004, despite the imposition of a strict voter ID law in 2006. Which meant, of course, that voter ID laws had no impact on turnout in communities of color, right? It is the story and the context that gives life and meaning to this data. And I was able to point out that there was this guy that ran for president in 2008 that may have had some influence on turnout, that had a very interesting ground game, that had a very interesting, Organizing for America was doing some things that were a little bit different, and possibly that had some information. And what we don't know, and still don't know, is how many more people were turned away from the polls. Right? So the key piece of data was missing. The story that gives the frame to the data was absent. And so that's the piece. The data and the metrics are only the frame and the structure from which you make context through all the work that you do. And being able to tell that story to people like me, some of whom don't have the long relationship with the organization, some of whom, like Celinda identified, are not aware of the important work that you do, don't understand that so many people don't know who the heck, which judge to vote for until they see your voter guide, that so many people don't know that it's your studies that help them figure out whether or not they can agree or disagree or how do we even think about this process. So many people don't know that so much comes from you all, that you can't count on the legacy and the very strong legacy of this organization to assume the story. You have to tell it. And I look forward to hearing more and more of these stories. Thank you.
We have time for just a couple of questions, so if you'll make, 2 or 3 of you will make your way to the microphone. While they're going, Keisha, could you tell us, funders sometimes wait till the very last minute, and so it's hard for the league to plan election kinds of activities.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Funders sometimes wait till the last minute to come forward for election activities, so it's hard to plan. Could you give us some little tidbits about that?
To say
how to handle it.
To say that the funding community moves at glacial speed would be an overstatement. We are not fast. And you'd think that since election year is never actually a surprise, you'd be all teed up and all ready to go. Part of it is, most of the time, even with late dollars, is you're not doing anything new, right? You're just expanding what you're already working on. And so being prepared and looking at low-cost ways to already engage in the work sometimes will actually trigger a funder to give more. I actually end up going back to our board of trustees and asking for more resources this year because we've had so many problems at the polls and so many challenges that even I find myself moving late money, much later money than I would want to. People ask me really at the end of last year, it's like, well, what are you doing with 2016? I'm like, I funded that in 2014. Like, you can't wait until the last second, but I do recognize a lot of funders, and particularly individual donors, tend to be very, very late in the game. And really, it's just a matter of, we all know it's coming, we have to be a bit more prepared, and making sure that the work you're doing is sort of scalable. So so you have, the Pinto plan and the Cadillac plan and I live in New York, I don't do cars anymore, but, but you have different plans that you can say, look, this is what we do on a shoestring. If we get these dollars, this is what we'll do. And so it's part of the plan that you build in your work. So whether it comes or not, the fundamental messages, what you learn and what you do, can be scaled.
Okay, thank you. Microphone 3, we're going to go backwards this time, in fairness.
Sarah Diefendorf, League of Women Voters of California. It's absolutely awesome that you're up there and you have such a history with the League. And so I'm wondering, what would be your elevator pitch or your 30-second message if somebody asked you, so what is the League? What's your story?
I usually say the League is one of the most important membership organizations in this country. That, in fact, the one thing the League has that nobody else has in the same kind of way is deep penetration within local communities that still have a singular focus on improving and educating voters in a nonpartisan kind of way. And oftentimes you do have to explain it again. But for most folks where I travel, they know what nonpartisan means, right? But the idea, but it's mostly the idea, it's the relationship with the local leagues that is really, I think, the big important thing about the League of Women Voters, and really being able to penetrate that work while still having the professionalism of the staff at the state and the national level that's able to leverage those relationships in ways that a lot of organizations that exist only digitally or only at the state level don't have.
Thank you.
Microphone 1.
Olivia Thorne, Delaware County, Pennsylvania. I wanted to say, we've been getting all these calls saying, gee, would you come and give a speech in September, usually September, on voting? And I say, fine, what in particular would your organization or your group, the local libraries are calling? And if for the county, and you're going, well, what do you want to hear? We haven't a clue what to hear. And I just wondered if you could share some ideas so that I have a better idea of what it is I should be trying to write as a speech, or maybe we need to nationally write a speech that we all use across the country.
I would caution too much about focusing messaging too much at the national level.
Okay.
But
Within
I
the
think
state?
what we're talking about is using some of the affirmative messages that Celinda already identified, focusing then on the issues of your community and those issues of the day, right? So if in fact you're in, like I live in Harlem, so the big issue right now is gentrification, right? So being able to talk about what's the relationship between engaging at the polls and the problems that you're experiencing in your day-to-day life. And how do you talk about, talking about different offices that are on the ballot. In this year, it's going to be all about being not demotivational. I mean, we've got, good or bad, right or wrong, at least right now, we've got two of the most unpopular candidates we've ever had at the top of the ticket. So what does that mean, pulling everything down and being really genuine? But I would say focus on the positive and the relationship between the issues that people care about. And if it's an institution like a library or something like that, if they're doing fundraising or things like that, how does it matter to the library if it's their people coming to the table?
Well, it's not so much that they're just trying to provide information to voters again, and they don't have a clue what to do.
Of course, if you have, and where the how and the where, the how, the where, the why,
How, the where, what,
and then
okay.
obviously vote 411.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, this will need to be our last question, and I think I saw 6 before I saw other people.
Yes,
so-
Michelle Dennis, Los Angeles. If a local group has limited funds, what technique do you think produces, in general, the highest impact? Is it video, press, social media, or what would you recommend?
If you're a local group, I would say probably a lot of the media outlets has probably the least amount of impact. Like TV is grossly inefficient. So think about like how you want to contact and how you want to touch folks. I would say if you're going to invest dollars, a lot of people who still read print media still vote. So it depends on what you're trying to do. So I'm sorry, I should have said that first. Are you trying to activate your base? Are you trying to get new people to the polls? I think what you're trying to do depends on a lot.
What we're trying to do is create new partnerships and collaborations with diverse groups in Los Angeles. LA's 43% Latino, and the league is not experienced right now in reaching out to that group.
Right. Those relationships aren't going to be built with a media relationship. It's not going to be a media push. It's going to be sitting down with groups on the ground, identifying clearly how the league's work integrates with their priorities, and then asking them, how do you best reach those groups, and how does the league penetrate with that? But I think if you try from a 10,000-foot view, not having any relationship with leadership, with organizations that may not know you as a trusted messenger, and then say we're just going to slap the logo on it and we're going to get out there and we're going to put it in Spanish, I don't know that is going to get you from point A to point B. The first thing doesn't cost that much, but is probably the greatest investment you're going to make, which is building those relationships in community.
Thank you so much, Keisha. We do appreciate your
Thank you.